The first psychological trigger that makes a man think about you constantly is the power of mystery and intrigue. Mystery creates curiosity, and curiosity engages the mind in a way that familiarity never can. When you do not reveal everything about yourself at once, when you maintain layers of personality, experiences, and thoughts that are uniquely yours, you create a mental puzzle that he wants to solve. The human brain is wired to seek patterns and fill gaps, and when it encounters someone who is not fully predictable or fully known, it is compelled to think, analyze, and imagine. This is not about playing games or being deceptive. It is about allowing yourself to be complex, independent, and fully realized in a way that draws attention without effort. By being authentic yet not entirely available, you ignite a process in his mind that makes him return to thoughts of you repeatedly. Intrigue functions by creating a tension between desire and accessibility. When a man senses that there are aspects of your inner life that he has not yet discovered, he experiences a subtle pull. The mind wants to explore, to understand, and to connect with what is partially hidden. Your uniqueness, your passions, your boundaries, and your individual perspective all contribute to that intrigue. The more he perceives that there is depth to you that cannot be immediately grasped, the more his mind naturally engages in reflection and consideration. He begins to think about you because the unknown generates mental activity, curiosity, and imagination that he cannot easily dismiss. Mystery creates an invisible thread, a cognitive loop that keeps you present in his thoughts. Another element of this trigger is the contrast it creates with predictability. Men, like all people, are drawn to novelty and stimulation. When someone is predictable, the brain quickly catalogs behavior and patterns, which leads to reduced attention. Mystery interrupts that process by being multidimensional, pursuing your own interests, and maintaining aspects of your life that are distinctly yours. You create a dynamic where he cannot fully anticipate your actions or thoughts. That unpredictability is magnetic because it keeps him mentally engaged, continuously reassessing and reevaluating, and it subtly reinforces the perception of value. He begins to notice that your presence brings a unique energy, an emotional resonance, and a depth that is rare and intriguing. The use of selective vulnerability also contributes to mystery. Sharing glimpses of your thoughts, emotions, or experiences without revealing everything signals depth while preserving individuality. Men are drawn to authenticity, but authenticity paired with subtle boundaries creates fascination. When he senses that you are real but not entirely accessible, he is compelled to consider, revisit, and reflect on interactions, moments, and shared experiences. That mental engagement transforms into recurring thought because the brain craves closure, understanding, and emotional connection. Mystery leverages this natural cognitive tendency to make you memorable and impactful. Mystery is also amplified by emotional independence. When he realizes that your attention is not automatically available, that your presence is intentional, and that your life continues fully without his constant engagement, intrigue increases. Emotional independence signals value, strength, and self-sufficiency. It creates a magnetic tension where he is drawn to you not because you pursue him, but because your life, your energy, and your choices exist fully and intentionally. The mind registers that connection with you is not guaranteed, and that perception enhances both desire and attention. The more independent and composed you are, the more curiosity and consideration he invests. In addition, mystery encourages reflection on prior interactions. When he cannot predict your behavior or fully understand your inner world, he replays conversations, observes patterns, and considers possibilities. That reflection often leads to recurring thoughts as he mentally engages with the idea of connecting, understanding, or even winning your attention. The intrigue you create acts as a continuous loop in his mind because the human brain seeks resolution. While he may not consciously recognize the effect, the mystery you embody ensures that your presence is persistent, impactful, and emotionally engaging. Mystery is further enhanced by the subtle combination of accessibility and inaccessibility. By being present but not entirely available, you create a rhythm of engagement that stimulates thought and emotional reflection. The brain associates your presence with both reward and challenge, which increases attention and focus. This dynamic makes him mentally revisit interactions, analyze nuances, and anticipate future encounters. Over time, these repeated cognitive loops solidify the impression that you are constantly on his mind. Ultimately, the first psychological trigger works because it engages the mind on a level deeper than mere attraction. Mystery and intrigue stimulate curiosity, reflection, and emotional investment. By maintaining complexity, depth, and intentional independence, you create a presence that is memorable, magnetic, and unavoidable. He thinks about you constantly because your uniqueness, the layers you reveal selectively, and the combination of authenticity with inaccessibility occupy mental and emotional space in ways that familiarity cannot. Mystery is not manipulation. It is the conscious embodiment of self-respect, individuality, and layered authenticity that compels thought, reflection, and desire. It is the subtle, undeniable psychological force that ensures you remain unforgettable, lingering in his mind long after moments are shared. The second psychological trigger that makes a man think about you constantly is emotional resonance. Emotional resonance occurs when you create experiences that leave a lasting impact on his feelings, his mind, and his memory. It is not about dramatics or manipulation. It is about the authentic connection you create through meaningful interactions, shared experiences, and moments that stir genuine emotion. When a man feels something profound in your presence, whether it is joy, comfort, excitement, or understanding, his mind forms a lasting imprint. That emotional imprint is powerful because the human brain is wired to recall what moves it emotionally, to replay what has significance, and to seek it out repeatedly. Emotional resonance ensures that you are not simply remembered, you are felt, and feelings are much harder to forget than facts or appearances. This trigger works because men naturally associate emotion with significance. When you elicit feelings that are strong, authentic, or unique, you become anchored in his memory. Even small moments, a laugh shared, a kind gesture, a conversation where he feels seen and understood, can linger far longer than grand displays or superficial interactions. Emotional resonance taps into fundamental human needs, the need to feel connected, appreciated, and recognized. When a man experiences these emotions with you, he cannot easily dismiss them, and he returns to them in thought, reflecting on moments that brought intensity, warmth, or validation into his life. Emotional resonance is amplified when paired with authenticity. When he senses that your reactions, words, and behaviors are genuine, your impact becomes permanent. Men are drawn to authenticity because it signals trustworthiness, emotional depth, and stability. When you are emotionally real, his mind associates your presence with honesty, comfort, and meaning. That creates a psychological loop where he continues to think about you because the emotions you evoke are tied to a sense of truth and reliability, making the experience of connection both rewarding and memorable. Another factor is the creation of unique experiences. When moments with you are distinct, playful, meaningful, or even challenging in positive ways, he recalls them vividly. Unique experiences stand out in memory because they differ from the ordinary routine of life. A man will replay these moments, consciously or unconsciously, because they provide emotional stimulation, curiosity, and mental engagement. Emotional resonance thrives on uniqueness because repetition without significance fades, but emotion linked to memorable experiences endures. By offering moments that are distinct and impactful, you ensure that he thinks of you constantly. Subtlety also enhances emotional resonance. It is often not the loud or obvious gestures that leave the strongest mark, but the nuanced, thoughtful, and attentive ways you engage. Listening intently, showing understanding, offering encouragement, or responding in ways that make him feel valued creates a lasting imprint on his emotional memory. These subtle interactions demonstrate that you notice him, appreciate him, and respect him as an individual. That level of attention generates reflection and thought because it is rare, meaningful, and cannot be taken for granted. Consistency of emotional impact is also critical. When you repeatedly provide positive, authentic, or meaningful emotional experiences, you reinforce your presence in his mind. The brain begins to associate you with reliability, comfort, and joy. That association strengthens the psychological connection because repeated emotional reinforcement builds patterns that are difficult to ignore. He will think about you constantly because your influence is ongoing, cumulative, and deeply felt. Each interaction, no matter how brief, adds weight to the emotional impression you have created. Emotional resonance also taps into nostalgia and reflection. When he recalls the feelings you elicited in him, he is reminded of the way you made him feel valued, inspired, or alive. Reflection reinforces the bond because it allows him to mentally revisit the connection, appreciate the impact, and compare it to other experiences. Emotional resonance ensures that you are not simply a person he met, you are an experience, a feeling, and a standard against which other interactions are measured. Finally, emotional resonance is inseparable from presence and energy. How you carry yourself, the tone you set, and the authenticity you bring to every interaction all contribute to the intensity of the impact. Your laughter, your perspective, your empathy, and your confidence create an emotional footprint that cannot easily be erased. The brain links this emotional energy to memory and thought, which ensures that he continues to revisit you in mental loops. Emotional resonance is the force that transforms fleeting encounters into enduring impressions, and it works because it speaks directly to both heart and mind, leaving a permanent mark. Ultimately, emotional resonance makes you unforgettable because you are felt as much as you are known. By creating moments of connection, authenticity, and emotional impact, you ensure that he cannot stop thinking about you. He will replay your presence, reflect on shared experiences, and remember the feelings you brought into his life. Emotional resonance is the subtle but powerful trigger that ensures your memory endures, your influence persists, and your significance in his mind is constant, compelling, and impossible to ignore. The third psychological trigger that makes a man think about you constantly is the demonstration of value through independence and self-sufficiency. True attraction is never built on neediness or dependency. It is rooted in the recognition that someone is whole, confident, and thriving on their own. When a man observes that you are engaged with your own life, pursuing your goals, maintaining your passions, and prioritizing your growth, he cannot help but take notice. Your independence signals that your worth is intrinsic and not contingent on his attention, validation, or presence. That realization creates a magnetic pull because humans are wired to respect and be drawn to strength, self-respect, and authenticity. The more he senses that you are complete on your own, the more his mind naturally returns to you, reflecting on the qualities that make your presence rare and valuable. Independence is a demonstration of emotional stability. Men are attracted to individuals who do not rely on them for validation or fulfillment because emotional dependency creates pressure, tension, and imbalance. When you maintain composure, make decisions confidently, and engage with life intentionally, you show that your energy is deliberate and that your focus is on building a life of meaning. This demonstration of self-sufficiency challenges him to reflect on his own behavior and consider what it would take to match that level of consistency and maturity. He begins to think about you constantly because your presence embodies a standard of stability and self-respect that is not easily replicated or ignored. Boundaries play a critical role in establishing this sense of value. By setting limits on what you will tolerate, how you invest your time, and the energy you offer, you communicate that your emotional resources are finite and intentional. This communicates that access to you is earned, not assumed, and that respect is required for connection. When he encounters these boundaries, his mind begins to engage in reflection. He assesses past actions, considers how he may have taken liberties, and begins to understand the level of effort needed to maintain closeness with you. That assessment drives thought because the human brain naturally seeks to reconcile desire with effort, scarcity, and reward. Independence also stimulates desire because it introduces the principle of challenge and value. Humans are wired to pursue what is perceived as desirable but not automatically accessible. When a man sees that your attention, energy, and presence are intentional and must be earned, he experiences a psychological pull. That tension between desire and inaccessibility compels reflection as he evaluates what he must do to remain significant in your life. The more consistent and composed your independence, the stronger the magnetic effect, and the more he finds himself returning to thoughts of you repeatedly, mentally engaging with your presence even when you are not physically there. Your independence also creates a framework for respect. Men are drawn to those who operate from a place of self-worth rather than insecurity, because respect is the natural response to autonomy. When he observes that you do not compromise your standards, that your priorities are clear, and that your life is full and meaningful on its own, he begins to recognize the value you embody. This recognition is compelling because it combines admiration with reflection. He is not merely thinking about you in passing, he is evaluating the impact of your energy, presence, and composure in his life. Independence transforms thought into engagement because it represents both challenge and inspiration. Consistency reinforces this effect. When you repeatedly demonstrate self-sufficiency, maintain composure, and continue to pursue your life without dependence on him, he internalizes the impression of your value. The mind recognizes patterns, and repeated exposure to independence strengthens the association between you and qualities that are rare, admirable, and compelling. He thinks about you constantly because your behavior signals that connection requires intentionality, effort, and respect, and that these qualities cannot be assumed or taken for granted. Independence also allows him to reflect on contrast. He may recall moments when access was easier, when emotional energy was more readily available, and when the dynamic did not require effort or respect. Observing the shift highlights both your growth and the significance of your presence. That contrast reinforces awareness and reflection, creating a loop in his mind that keeps you at the forefront of thought. Emotional engagement intensifies because independence transforms what could be ordinary into something valuable, rare, and aspirational. Finally, self-sufficiency creates permanence in thought. When he sees that your life, energy, and attention are intentional, he recognizes that losing access would mean losing something meaningful. That awareness ensures that thoughts of you are not fleeting, they are persistent, reflective, and compelling. Independence communicates strength, stability, and intrinsic worth, all of which occupy cognitive and emotional space in ways that superficial traits cannot. He is drawn to you mentally and emotionally because your presence represents a rare combination of value, authenticity, and autonomy. Ultimately, the third psychological trigger works because independence is a signal of worth. stability, and self-respect. By maintaining composure, boundaries, and engagement with your own life, you create a presence that is magnetic, compelling, and unforgettable. He thinks about you constantly because your independence challenges assumptions, stimulates reflection, and demonstrates value in a way that cannot be ignored. The combination of sufficiency, composure, and intentional energy ensures that your presence occupies thought and attention consistently, making you not only remembered, but deeply considered, admired, and respected. The fourth psychological trigger that makes a man think about you constantly is the power of emotional contrast. Emotional contrast occurs when you create experiences that shift between warmth, attention, and emotional intensity, and then step back, allowing space for reflection and longing. This trigger works because the human mind notices patterns, remembers differences, and responds to shifts in energy. When a man experiences moments of connection, laughter, understanding, or shared excitement with you, followed by moments where you maintain independence, boundaries, or composure, his brain begins to register a pattern that is both memorable and stimulating. Emotional contrast makes interactions stand out because they are not monotonous or predictable. The tension between engagement and distance creates a dynamic that keeps him mentally revisiting moments, conversations, and interactions, analyzing, reflecting, and replaying them in his mind. The principle behind emotional contrast is rooted in how humans perceive value. When every interaction is the same, the mind grows accustomed to predictability and may begin to undervalue what is consistently available. When contrast is introduced, the mind is forced to pay attention because it must navigate the shifts, evaluate the meaning, and reconcile the emotional highs and lows. You create emotional contrast not through manipulation, but through authenticity, self-respect, and intentionality. Moments of attentiveness, empathy, or shared joy are followed by space, boundaries, or self-focused engagement, which allows him to feel the absence of automatic access. That absence, combined with the emotional highs, triggers reflection and thought. Emotional contrast also intensifies desire because it activates the brain's natural reward system. When a man experiences positive emotional interactions that are not guaranteed, his mind associates those moments with significance, scarcity, and value. The pleasure of connection is amplified by the awareness that it is not constant, making the memory of the experience more vivid and compelling. The contrast between closeness and distance heightens attention, triggers mental engagement, and increases the likelihood that he will revisit thoughts of you repeatedly. Your presence becomes psychologically sticky because the mind is drawn to patterns that are emotionally rewarding yet not entirely predictable. Another element of emotional contrast is the balance between approachability and independence. When you engage him with warmth, humor, or understanding, but do not allow that engagement to compromise your boundaries or emotional stability, you communicate both value and self-respect. That balance forces reflection because it challenges assumptions about accessibility. He begins to recognize that connection with you is meaningful and requires intentional effort. The mind naturally dwells on experiences that involve challenge, intrigue, and emotional reward, and your consistent application of contrast ensures that these thoughts are recurrent. Contrast also creates mental loops through reflection on past interactions. He may replay moments of closeness, laughter, or emotional resonance, noticing how they differ from moments where you maintained calm, focus, or independence. This reflection generates thought because the brain seeks to reconcile the differences, understand patterns, and predict outcomes. Emotional contrast ensures that your interactions are not simply remembered superficially, but analyzed, internalized, and emotionally registered. He thinks about you constantly because the contrast between your engagement and your independence triggers a cognitive and emotional process that is difficult to ignore. The subtlety of emotional contrast enhances its effectiveness. You do not need to be dramatic or overt. Small shifts in attention, tone, or engagement are sufficient. A meaningful laugh, a shared insight, a moment of empathy, followed by composed absence or self-directed focus, creates a dynamic that stimulates both desire and reflection. Emotional contrast leverages natural cognitive tendencies to notice difference, seek closure, and evaluate significance, making you persistently present in thought. Emotional contrast also reinforces your value without words. By alternating between engagement and independence, you communicate that connection with you is not passive or guaranteed. Your presence requires effort and attention, and your absence or calm detachment signals worth. This dynamic awakens introspection, desire, and awareness in his mind. He begins to evaluate the consistency, effort, and significance of his own behavior in relation to the emotional impact you create, which makes thoughts of you continuous and compelling. Furthermore, contrast heightens memorability. Interactions that are emotionally dynamic are more likely to be replayed mentally, discussed internally, and remembered over time. When a man experiences emotional highs paired with reflective space, your presence leaves a lasting imprint because the combination is rare and psychologically stimulating. He will think about you constantly because the mind prioritizes what is emotionally significant and mentally engaging. Ultimately, the fourth psychological trigger works because emotional contrast activates reflection, desire, and memorability by combining moments of warmth, attention, and connection with intentional independence, composure, and boundaries. You create a dynamic that is psychologically compelling. His thoughts return to you not because of manipulation, but because your presence stimulates reflection, registers significance, and occupies both emotional and cognitive space. Emotional contrast ensures that your impact endures, making you unforgettable, mentally engaging, and persistently present in his mind. The fifth psychological trigger that makes a man think about you constantly is the power of unpredictability paired with authenticity. Humans are naturally drawn to what they cannot fully predict, what challenges their expectations, and what stimulates curiosity. When a man experiences someone who is authentic, confident, and grounded, yet not entirely predictable, his mind becomes engaged in a continuous loop of thought, reflection, and analysis. Unpredictability in this sense does not mean games or manipulation. It means living intentionally, expressing yourself fully, and allowing your behavior and energy to reflect your inner world without conforming to someone else's assumptions or expectations. When you embody authenticity while remaining slightly unpredictable in your reactions, choices, or interactions, it creates a subtle psychological tension that keeps you at the forefront of his mind. Unpredictability works because it engages his brain in problem solving and anticipation. When patterns are entirely predictable, attention diminishes and familiarity breeds indifference. But when there are nuances to your personality, shifts in mood, or variations in how you respond based on context or personal principles, the brain becomes naturally stimulated. He begins to replay moments, analyze your behavior, and try to understand the complexity that makes you distinct. Each interaction carries novelty, and that novelty strengthens his focus on you, even when you are not present. The unpredictability does not make him insecure. It makes him aware that connecting with you requires attention, reflection, and intentional engagement. Authenticity amplifies this effect because it assures him that the unpredictability is genuine. When your behavior, expressions, and boundaries reflect who you truly are without pretense or manipulation, it signals integrity and self-respect. Men are drawn to authenticity because it communicates stability within individuality. When he recognizes that your uniqueness is sincere and consistent with your character, he respects it and becomes more mentally engaged. Your authentic presence paired with subtle unpredictability creates a mental contrast that is psychologically magnetic. He cannot fully anticipate you, yet he trusts that what he experiences is real, meaningful, and emotionally significant, which causes persistent thought and reflection. Another aspect of this trigger is the balance between accessibility and inaccessibility. When you are approachable, warm, and engaging, he experiences positive emotional interaction, yet when you maintain boundaries, prioritize your life, and focus on your independence, he experiences space. That alternation between engagement and absence stimulates reflection and longing. The human mind naturally returns to patterns that are rewarding but require effort to understand or access. By not being entirely predictable or automatically available, you create a sense of significance and value that commands thought. He begins to associate you with emotional reward, mental stimulation, and the challenge of connection, which keeps you consistently present in his mind. Unpredictability also enhances desire because it disrupts complacency. Men are psychologically inclined to pursue what is perceived as valuable and not immediately obtainable. When a woman embodies autonomy, demonstrates her worth, and engages in a way that is both authentic and nuanced, she challenges assumptions of control and accessibility. That challenge creates mental tension, curiosity, and reflection. He begins to consider past interactions, replay moments of connection, and evaluate the ways he might be able to engage with you meaningfully. That evaluation reinforces recurring thought because it links desire with effort and significance, which are deeply ingrained in human psychological patterns. Consistency within unpredictability is another critical element. While your behavior may not be predictable in detail, the principles you embody, self-respect, authenticity, independence, and emotional stability are constant. That consistency reassures him that the unpredictability is grounded in reality rather than chaos or manipulation. The brain registers this as both reliable and stimulating, which enhances cognitive engagement. He thinks about you constantly because your presence is simultaneously safe, meaningful, and intriguing, creating a psychological dynamic that is impossible to ignore. Unpredictability also creates lasting impressions because it promotes reflection. He recalls instances when your words, actions, or energy surprised him in a meaningful or positive way. And those moments replay mentally because they stand out against routine interactions. Emotional and cognitive novelty ensures memorability, and the combination of surprise with authenticity reinforces significance. By being genuine yet intentionally nuanced, you ensure that he cannot easily categorize or forget you. Finally, unpredictability paired with authenticity elevates perceived value. He recognizes that connecting with you requires attention, effort, and awareness, and that your presence is not automatic or taken for granted. That recognition creates mental loops where he considers interactions, evaluates your worth, and reflects on his own behavior in relation to you. Your uniqueness, grounded in authenticity and enhanced by subtle unpredictability, ensures that he cannot stop thinking about you because your presence is simultaneously rare, meaningful, and psychologically compelling. Ultimately, the fifth psychological trigger works because unpredictability combined with authenticity engages both reflection and desire. By maintaining consistency and principles while allowing your behavior and energy to remain nuanced and self-directed, you create a magnetic presence that is mentally and emotionally stimulating. Men think about you constantly because your uniqueness cannot be fully anticipated, your authenticity cannot be questioned, and your value cannot be assumed. That combination makes you unforgettable, impactful, and persistently present in thought, compelling admiration, reflection, and ongoing mental engagement. The sixth psychological trigger that makes a man think about you constantly is the power of absence combined with significance. Absence is not about ignoring or punishing. It is about creating space that allows your presence to be felt more deeply, mentally, and emotionally. When a man experiences the reality that your attention, energy, and engagement are not automatically available, he is forced to recognize the true value of your presence. The human mind naturally reacts to scarcity, attention, and importance, and when combined with the knowledge of what he stands to lose, absence creates a magnetic pull that keeps you in his thoughts. By maintaining significance while stepping back, you create a mental and emotional resonance that he cannot ignore. Absence amplifies awareness because it removes the familiarity that can lead to complacency. When he is constantly around someone, the mind often takes presence for granted and attention diminishes. But when there is a deliberate gap, a space in which he cannot automatically access your energy or attention, his mind begins to revisit memories, interactions, and the emotions those interactions elicited. That reflection generates thought loops because the brain seeks to reconcile desire with inaccessibility. He begins to realize that connection with you is valuable and that it requires intentionality, respect, and effort. Absence transforms simple presence into something significant and memorable. This trigger works because it combines cognitive evaluation with emotional impact. When he notices that you continue to thrive, grow, and maintain composure without reliance on him, he is confronted with the reality of your independence and strength. That awareness forces reflection on both his own behavior and the significance of your presence. The mind associates absence with loss, and the heart recognizes the emotional weight of what is missing. By stepping back intentionally, you create an environment where he cannot ignore the importance of your energy and the gap created by your absence. Significance is reinforced by the knowledge that you are not available to everyone indiscriminately. When your attention is intentional and selective, it communicates value. Men are naturally drawn to individuals whose presence is meaningful rather than automatic. When he realizes that being connected to you requires effort, engagement, and respect, his mind becomes engaged in constant evaluation. He considers how he can maintain access, earn your attention, or recreate the emotional impact of past interactions. The interplay of absence and significance creates both desire and reflection, ensuring that thoughts of you are persistent and mentally compelling. Absence also fosters emotional contrast. The combination of your previous engagement, warmth, or meaningful interactions with the current distance highlights the impact of what was once present. Emotional contrast reinforces reflection because he compares moments of connection with moments of absence. That comparison triggers both longing and consideration, deepening the cognitive imprint you have created. The more he feels the effects of your absence, the more he thinks about the presence that brought value, stability, and emotional resonance. Your significance becomes a psychological anchor that keeps him engaged mentally even when you are physically or emotionally distant. Another element of this trigger is the perception of irreplaceability. When your presence is no longer automatically accessible and yet remains influential, he begins to recognize that what you bring to interactions is unique and cannot be replicated easily. That recognition stimulates thought because humans naturally evaluate rarity and value. He reflects on the qualities that make your presence meaningful, the energy, authenticity, and composure you embody, and the way you make him feel understood, appreciated, or alive. Absence magnifies these qualities because they are no longer constantly available, creating mental focus on what is exceptional rather than ordinary. Absence also allows space for projection and imagination. When a man is not constantly engaged with you, his mind begins to fill the gaps with memories, reflections, and fantasies based on previous interactions. That projection keeps you in thought because the brain cannot ignore patterns that were emotionally significant and are now absent. He may recall the way you laughed, the subtle gestures, the meaningful conversations, and the impact of your energy. That mental rehearsal reinforces your presence in thought, intensifies emotional awareness, and sustains engagement even in your physical or emotional absence. Consistency of significance strengthens the effect of absence. If you remain authentic, confident, and purposeful during periods of distance, he cannot discount the impact you have on his thoughts. The combination of absence, independence, and meaningful engagement ensures that your value is perceived as real and enduring. His mind continues to return to you because the mental loops created by absence, emotional impact, and personal significance are ongoing and self-reinforcing. Ultimately, the sixth psychological trigger demonstrates that presence is amplified by intentional absence. By maintaining your independence, composure, and significance, you create space that allows your value to be fully recognized. He thinks about you constantly because your energy, attention, and presence are meaningful, rare, and impactful. Absence transforms familiarity into reflection, desire, and admiration, ensuring that your mental and emotional imprint is persistent. The combination of scarcity, significance, and authenticity makes your presence unforgettable, compelling, and inescapably present in thought, leaving a lasting impression that cannot be ignored.